Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed that what you wear has the power to change how you feel? Project Endure apparel is designed to remind you that easy won't make you stronger, and that growth is an uncomfortable choice that we all have the privilege to make every day. Look good, feel good, and perform good. Head to the link in the show notes to shop Project Endure apparel and keep on doing hard things. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 171. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in Connecticut, we have a very, very special guest, Tim Doyle. Tim, how you doing?
Doing well, Joe. Glad to think of myself as very, very special. I appreciate that praise.
Yeah, well, this doesn't take away from the fact that you're very, very special, but all of my guests are very, very special. And I don't know how that began, but I started that potentially as a nervous tick way back when I started the podcast. I was just like, I don't know what else to say. So I'm going to say everyone's very, very special. And I've come to really, really believe it and really mean it. And so you are special for more reasons than one. One of the reasons you're very special is because we are recording this the same day, just hours after I reached out to you to see if you could hop on to record this episode. So we're here short notice, and it's going to be a great one. But I want to start with this. We got connected through my brother, Chris, who is episode 106 of this podcast. And I'm so glad he connected us because you and I think along very similar lines. We have very similar drives, desires, mindsets. And for many reasons, I think this conversation is going to get very deep. But before we get any depth to this conversation, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to people listening who might not know who you are.
Yeah, my name is Tim Doyle. I'm 25 years old. I'm originally from Greenwich, Connecticut. And like you said, I got connected with you through your brother, Chris. Chris and I both went to Holy Cross. How we got connected, we were both in piano class my sophomore year, Chris's junior year. Our paths would have never crossed if it wasn't for that class. And yeah, I mean, I love to work out, was big into social media back then and still am now. And I think Chris saw those features of myself and thought it was very similar to you as well. So he was like, hey, I think you would really enjoy what my brother does as well. So, I mean, I first found out about you back when I was a sophomore in college. I think I started following you back then. So, I mean, it's been awesome to see your growth as a person and also just from a business standpoint as well. And then just kept following you. And I was like, Chris was right. We are very similar, have very similar mindsets and very similar work ethics. And then when I started my podcast this past March, I knew I was like, Joe Rinaldi is one of the main people I would love to have on. And that's when we really started to get connected. And it wasn't just me being connected with your brother, Chris, but also us building a relationship now. And I knew when we were having that conversation, it felt like it was two friends who were just talking for a very long time. And so awesome to see how our relationship has grown. And I'm excited to see what the future has in store for both of us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll just throw this out there. I'm 30, you're 25. In my mind, we're the same age. I have conversations with people all the time, and we'll get to the end of the conversation. And part of me wants to just express, I'm so glad that we had this conversation and that we're the same age. We're kind of in the same season of life. And then I catch myself all the time. I'm talking to like 22-year-olds and 23-year-olds, and I have to say to myself, I'm not that, I'm 30 and I feel youthful. And at the same time, I feel incredibly old. And so there's part of me that sees the old soul inside of you. Is that always been how you've operated?
Yeah, definitely. I think honestly, my entire life, um, I have three older siblings who are much older than me. So my oldest sibling is 10 years older than me, and then one who's 9 years older than me, and then one who's 7 or 8 years older. So I've always been around my entire life, just people who were much older than me. So I think I just matured at a much younger age compared to other kids, and I was in much more mature environment and mature experiences compared to the other kids that I was around. So I think that definitely played a massive role in that.
Yeah. So before we dive into the regular questions that I like to ask guests, I figured we'd do something a bit different. You have a podcast called The Outworker, and you have some pillars for The Outworker, 10 to be exact. I'm going to pick and choose a few, and I would love to hear just why they are pillars and what they mean to you. So, the first one that I'll go to is constantly evolving. So, that's a pillar of yours. What does that mean, and why is that a pillar?
I love this. You're the first one who's been asking me about this, so this is awesome. Yeah, I think that and this to bring in another guest of mine that I had actually. His name is Ace Karani, who has this brand called Undefined, where to play off of his brand as well, I think it's very easy to define ourselves in our life and to think we have to be on this very straight path and know where we want to be 20 years from now, rather than having the freedom and also the maturity to change your paths, whether it's in your career, whether it's with relationships, whether it's the things that you're very interested in. So, I mean, to bring social media into it as well and, branding as well, I used to do all like just very heavily fitness and nutrition type stuff. And I created a personal brand for myself named Jim Doyle. My name's Tim Doyle. One of my friends was like, "Hey, you need to go by Jim Doyle." I'm like, "Wow, that's actually really, really good." So for 5 or 6 years, I went under this almost this alias or this second identity as Jim Doyle. And about a year ago, I was like, you know what? I'm starting to grow out of like just being this gym bro to a certain extent, or I'm more than just fitness. I'm more than just working out. I have many more passions and many more interests, and more so also from social media, just using social media as a tool to share more so just like life advice and wisdom rather than stuff around fitness. So that's where that pillar comes from me, really. It comes from that evolution of who I was, where I was this young kid who was just very obsessed with working out and fitness. I was known by a lot of people by Jim Doyle. People would literally call me Jim Doyle, which was very cool. And I was like, wow, that's, strong brand positioning as a person. But I was like, I had that confidence within myself to evolve as a person. It didn't feel like I put my entire identity into this one part of myself where it's like, well, this is all that I am and this is all that I know, so I have to stick with this. So allowing yourself to evolve. Because also from a career standpoint, I used to work in commercial real estate when I was right out of college and made a ton of great relationships within that business and learned a ton of great skills. Literally all the skills that I built in commercial real estate were skills that I will use for my entire life and whatever it is that I'm going to be doing. And I had an up close view of what true hard work and success looks like from people who were in the top of their industry. But I kind of just knew that, I don't think this is the path for me. And I know there are a lot of kids who could be in that industry, be in that environment. You hear New York City commercial real estate, it sounds like success. And there is a lot of success within that business, and you can earn a lot of money. And there's a lot of great things that could come from that. And I saw that when I was in the business, but it just didn't feel like that's what I was supposed to do. Like who I was as a person, that didn't feel like the person that I was. And so that was another big instance where I allowed myself to evolve. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest pillars because it's a lot easier said than done to allow yourself to evolve as a person. And that's definitely something that I wanted to promote every single day and having one of the main pillars with the Outworker.
Hmm. You know, this is what I thought would happen, which is I am going to talk for a little while because I have so many thoughts that came up. And we're going to probably run out of time to talk about everything, which just means I'll have to have you back at some point. But that's a good problem. So, a couple things. One, there's a quote that I had written down prior to our recording here because I wanted an opportunity to bring it up. And you gave me that window. We are less than 10 minutes in and I have the chance. So it's from Ursula Le Guin. And she said, "What goes too long unchanged destroys itself. The forest is forever because it dies and dies and dies. And so it lives." And to me, it's a very beautiful image of change, right? In order to survive, you have to shed layers, you have to shed leaves, you have to change. And in a way, being undefined means not tying yourself or anchoring yourself to just one thing. It reminds me of the phrase strong convictions loosely held. And it means believing in something and striving for things and committing to things, pursuing things, and at the same time being able and willing to pivot when that path no longer serves you or aligns with the person that you're becoming. And episode 67 of this podcast, I had on a great friend, Mike Zacco, and he talked about the human experience and how to him, the human experience was the highs, the lows, the ups, the downs, the twists, the turns. It was everything. And not defining ourselves by the things that we do or the titles that we have, but by the characteristics and qualities that we've developed. And so instead of tying yourself to being a runner, and if you lose running, you would lose everything. Maybe you're just a competitor and you are channeling the competitor in you into running in this season of your life. And if you were to ever lose running, you could channel the competitor in you to something else, right? I'm a hard worker. That could be applied to anything. And if for some reason one day I can't be in the gym, I'll apply that to something else. And I'll say it out loud here. If I had to apply it to something else, I think I'd learn the piano, funny enough. And so there are these qualities and characteristics that can be fluid and dynamic and can be channeled and poured into anything that we choose. And I think there's a lot of freedom and power in that. And then on a lighter note, I went by Joe Flowfit on Instagram for quite a while, probably before you started following me. And, or maybe not, I don't know. But it was this season of my life where I was very much, I wanted to be seen as this fitness influencer, this fitness guru, if you will, and everything was fitness. And one day I decided I was more than that. And I wanted to share more of who I was as a person and how my mind worked. And I decided to post a photo of my face, just a portrait, and share with Instagram, who I was, this is Joe. And I lost a ton of followers. And I realized at that moment what had happened, which was people were just not used to seeing me. They weren't used to seeing that type of content. That's not what they signed up for. And that was okay. But there was a lot of freedom in that for me, knowing that I could choose to be who I wanted to be and that the right people would follow along. So that was a lot of rambling, but I resonate a lot with what you said. And we'll jump to another pillar here, which I'm sure is intertwined because at the end, I think this is all intertwined. You said, "We didn't create this, we are this." What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, this whole Outworker philosophy and the name behind the Outworker, as much as I created that name for the podcast, it stemmed from the way that I lived my life for the past, I would say 8 years. And it really started without even me knowing it when I first stepped foot into the gym. That's when this whole Outworker philosophy subconsciously had started. And a lot of it has to do with my journey through the gym and with fitness because that's a massive part of my life and, building my body and building my mind. So as much as I wanted to create a podcast, that is something that I created. The name, The, Outworker, it was almost like this is the name. There's nothing else really that there are other names that I had for the podcast, but it was like, this is the thing that shines above everything else because it was just so deeply ingrained into my makeup as a person.
Mm. So I'm not sure at what level people listening will be able to relate to what I'm about to say, but anyone who's created something, a business, a piece of art, a piece of music, you understand on some level that your creation is a part of who you are, right? Your art, your creation is a way of being. It's not necessarily this thing, it's almost an extension of who you already are or who you strive to be. And in that way, I think a lot of our life is not uh, what we make, it's not what we create, it's just who we are. And that comes out and is expressed in various forms. And so, your podcast, my podcast, the things we're doing, they are who we are. They are not things we are creating necessarily. And so, we'll keep going here again, all tied together. Another pillar: conform to the person who lives within you. Tell me more about that one.
Yeah, that's a big one. And just to continue the theme with the gym, I had that thought when I was working out. And I think that's for a lot of people. They have their best thoughts when it's through physical activity. And I think conformity is one of the things that we struggle with the most, all of us. And so I'm like, all right, how can I take this word conformity and put a spin on it to make it a positive? Because we all conform to our surroundings, the people around us. When we're in different environments, it becomes that much easier to go along with the crowd. But I'm a big believer, and with speaking with other people on my podcast and hearing their experiences, and it kind of provides further evidence for me. I think we all have this truest version of ourselves that live within us, and it can be scary to allow that person to be on display or put that person out on the surface so that that's the person that people see. So my main goal is, how can we strip through those layers and conform to that person, the truest version of ourselves that lives deep within us?
Hmm. I would encourage anyone listening to this to pause for just a few seconds or a few minutes after I say what I'm about to say in order to give yourself a chance to think. And I really would encourage you to do that no matter where you are. I think deep down we all know who that is. We all know the person who is deep down inside, the most authentic, deepest, most genuine version of ourselves. And I don't think most of us are outwardly expressing that person. So just sit with your thoughts for a few seconds, a few minutes, a few hours if you need, and just tap into who that person is. Get clear on who that person is, because when you let that person shine through, that's the best version of you. And it's scary and it's hard and it's vulnerable. Um, but I would encourage everyone here to try to tap into that a little bit more. And that starts with getting clear on who that is. And after you're done with the pause, because I'm sure you paused the podcast and now it's been a few seconds or a few minutes or a few hours, you're back. Um, I want to share this story that I haven't shared on the podcast, and it's a powerful one. It's about Thomas Edison. I believe it's a true story. That's what I've been told. That's what my research tells me. But it goes that Thomas Edison, as a child, got sent home from school one day with a note, and he gave the note to his mom. And his mom opened the note from the teacher and she read it out loud. And she said, "Mrs. Edison, your son is too intelligent and too bright for this small school. We don't have the resources to teach him the way he needs to be taught. Please teach him at home." And so Thomas Edison was homeschooled and he eventually became the Thomas Edison that we all know, the creative genius, the inventor, the person who changed the world in a lot of ways. When Thomas Edison's mother passed away, he was an adult and he was going through her things, and he found a shoebox in her closet, and he opened the shoebox and he found the note that his teacher had given him that day as a child. And he opened it up. He was curious and he read it. And it said, "Dear Mrs. Edison, your son is mentally ill. We can't have him at this school. He's expelled." And I get the chills. I like every time I say that or think of that story, I get the chills because it he had the genius inside of him, right? And this teacher or the people around him, they saw the madness, right? They saw the quote unquote the illness. But deep down inside, there was this genius, and all that he needed, and he didn't know it because he was a child, all that he needed was someone to believe in him, to pull that out of him. And for him, that was his mother. And I think we all need that from time to time. We need that borrowed belief. We need someone else to say that they see something inside of us. And then we need to lean into that and embrace it. And I just think it's such a beautiful example of that, of belief. And so with that being said, Tim, we'll go to the last pillar I want to highlight before we jump into more of your story. And that pillar is just trying to get better. You define what better means. Tell me more about that last part. You define what better means.
Yeah, I mean, for me right now, what better looks like is I'm trying to get better within my professional career. I'm trying to create a better podcast every single day and network with more people. And I'm trying to get better in the gym. Those are what the pillars of better looks like for me. I've spoken with people where they may be obsessed with creating a clothing brand and creating better pieces of clothing. That better looks much different than what better looks like for me. We both have the same sort of mindset and drive for getting better, but what better looks like for me won't look like it's not what it's going to look like for somebody else. So I always struggle with, right? I always find it funny when people try to have these very structured, definitive understandings of what words mean. And it's impossible to do that because we all have our own way of creating our own plans and our own process that if you try to put your other if you try to put your definitions on other people, you might be limiting their growth or their success because you're not allowing them the freedom to define those types of words for themselves.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off that and say that success is very subjective and it can look so different for so many different people, and that's okay. It doesn't have to look the same for everyone. I would also say that I heard this on a podcast recently, but that the only stupid people in the world are the people who are absolutely positive that there's only one way to do things, or that there's only one right answer, or that everything has to be a certain way. And the truth is, it's all gray space, right? We live in the gray. The same thing can mean different things to different people. The same experience can be interpreted different ways by different people. Our realities are so different, even though we're living next to each other. And I think there's something beautiful about that. There's also something very hard about that. But I think there's mostly freedom in that because you get to choose what this life looks like for you. You get to choose what the things that happen to you mean to you, which we'll get to. And you get to choose ultimately how your perspective is shaped and how you view the world. And that's a beautiful thing.
One of my favorite quotes, I know you're a big quote guy as well. One of my favorite quotes is one that I read about and learned about my freshman year of philosophy class in college. The only thing that I know is that I know nothing, Socrates. And that is the ultimate quote. I think because of that quote, I've tried to strip away the phrase when I speak and when I write, the phrase I know. I always try to say I think rather than I know because I think I have I don't know what it is, either the maturity or just the lack of ego to how can I say I know? It's always I think it's a lot of the time we have to say I think rather than I know.
Mhm. Let me ask you a hard question. If you had to choose one thing that you know to be true, what would that thing be?
My name. I know I'm Tim Doyle.
that was that was a very good answer. All right. So with that being said, Tim, when you look back at your life so far, what's the hardest thing that you've had to handle that you did not get to choose for yourself?
Going through a terrible back injury that started in September of 2021 or September of 2020. 7 months of 24/7 excruciating chronic pain throughout my back and my legs. What I tell people though is those were the 7 worst months of my entire life in the short term, but the best 7 months in the long term, and nothing comes close. And that entire experience literally transformed my entire life. And tying things back to the conform to the person who lives within you and having that courage to be who you are deep down, I think it becomes much easier to be that truest, most authentic version of yourself when you go through some type of very challenging experience against your will, because that shell just gets broken and you will just be broken into so many different pieces. And then when you eventually do get put back together, because the pain in my eyes, it always has to subside at some point, you just become this much more refined, authentic version of yourself. And it's impossible for that shell that was living there. It's impossible for it to come back in my eyes.
Mm. So at the onset of that 7 months, when the back pain began and things were excruciating and you didn't know what was to come, is there anything that anyone could have told you that would have made you think this will be the best 7 months of my life? The worst, best 7 months of my life?
Probably not, but I was the person who, I don't know how long it was into it. It was probably a couple months in, I had started physical therapy, and I was in my bedroom lying on the ground just in so much pain. And I like to think of myself as a pretty mentally tough person. I think I have a different mindset compared to a lot of people, where I can be put into painful situations and I can kind of have an opposite effect on me at times, where I get excited or I enjoy it a little. And I think that's a double-edged sword in times at times. But I remember I was lying on the floor in my bedroom just in so much pain. And I said, this is going to be a hell of a story. And I think having that mindset of seeing your life as a story, and when you can
Mm.
redefine things and rewire things, that when challenges come into your life, when you're faced with these difficult times, that's what makes a story exciting. If you didn't go through anything challenging in your life, you would have the most boring story that nobody would ever want to hear about. But that was the moment where I realized, all right, you're going through a lot of shit right now, but this is going to be a story that people will be able to benefit from. And to go off of that, I created a whole podcast miniseries on that entire experience. And I've literally been able to talk with people all over the world on all continents about how they've gone through similar experiences and how they've benefited so much from me sharing my story. So it's like the pain that you go through, it's not just for you. It's so you can share it with other people. And it may not even be a back injury that they're going through. It may not be the same thing that you're going through, but it just seeing somebody who goes through a tough time and is able to get past that, is able to endure, they can benefit from it.
Yeah. There's so much good stuff there. And I agree that when we're able to give pain a purpose, it 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 still hurts, but it's a different kind of hurt and it's more bearable. And there's more perspective that gets placed on it. I what I'm about to say next, I think would rub some people the wrong way. And I'm on a personal level, trying to do a better job of sharing those things that some people might not agree with. Because I think in the past, I've shied away from saying things or doing things that some people might turn away from. Right? I just want to be liked. But one of the truths, so this is one of the things I think I know, and I think I know it. So I don't know it, but I don't just think it. I think I know it. Is that you are not a victim unless you choose to be a victim. And I say that because we don't control what happens to us. And there are a lot of hard, tragic, excruciating things that happen to people all over the world every single day that they don't get to choose. At the end of the day, we can't control those things, but I do believe that we can control our perspective. We can control our attitude. And it might not be easy. It might take a long time. It might take a lot of work. But I do believe that we get to choose how we frame things. And unless you frame your story with you as the victim, you don't have to be the victim. And I know that's a hard thing to hear if you're in the storm, if you're feeling the pain, if you just got knocked down and you have no idea how you're going to get back up. But I don't think you have to be a victim unless you choose to be a victim. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I made a video kind of to a similar effect a little while back. I think you can't always choose the what, but you always choose the why. You won't always choose what you go through, but you can always define the why behind you go through it. If you have a crummy day at work, all right, yeah, great, you had a crummy day, but what did you learn? Why can I become a better person from this? So that was kind of with my back injury, that was the same thing where it was like, well, what can I take from this pain? Yes, I went through pain. I can't change pain. But why did I go through this pain? That's what I get to choose.
Mm. I think the simple question, what is this teaching me, can help in a lot of those situations where, it's been a tough day, it's been a hard week, that thing that happened to us doesn't seem fair. I think if we could just ask that question, what is this teaching me? How am I growing from this? If you actually sit with it and try to answer it, I think that's a great way to start reframing perspective. And I'm wondering for you, outside of what you've already shared, what have you learned from those 7 months of back pain? What has that taught you? How has that helped you grow?
Yeah, I mean, it was just a full healing journey, not just from pain, but I think just my whole recovery process for that was very unique from the perspective of it wasn't a physical type of recovery process, but more so of a mental, emotional recovery process where, not to get too deep into the weeds here, but a lot of the pain that I was feeling from my back had a mental sort of foundation to it rather than me just dealing with an injury. So I had to work through mental and emotional stuff rather than just going to physical therapy and icing my back and doing that type of stuff. So I really didn't just recover from a back injury, but it kind of felt like I healed my body and my mind and my spirit in all aspects. And I feel like I came to acceptance with either different things I had gone through before my back pain and came to acceptance with different insecurities that I have. And everyone's like that. And what I realized through that entire experience was that you don't need to change parts of yourself that you don't like. You just need to be aware of them. Like we all have parts of ourselves that we don't like and we wish we could change. By trying to change it, you're just making it even worse. You're much better off using acceptance and awareness rather than trying to change who you are as a person because I'm guessing most people listening to this podcast right now are all young adults or adults. There's probably not many young kids. We're all at points in our lives where we're really not going to like change our makeup, So it becomes more so of, okay, how good can I become at just being aware of who I am as a person and accepting who I am as a person? And I think with a lot of things, especially with emotions, like if you're like, oh, I'm not feeling happy right now, or I'm feeling sad, or like these are the insecurities that, are breaking me down. I don't think it's necessarily like those things that hold us back, but it's like our reaction to those things. If you're like, oh, I'm dealing with anxiety today. Well, is it the anxiety that's holding you back, or is it the reaction that you're having to, oh, I'm a person that has anxiety or anxious feelings today? And I think that's a huge component that I realized. And when I broke it down between, okay, I'm not an insecure person, it's just I'm reacting to my insecurities at certain points, that totally set me free.
I think what you said is one of the most important things that anyone ever could hear and then internalize and understand. You are not your emotions. You are not your feelings. Just because you feel anxious does not mean you have to be an anxious person, right? Just because you feel anything does not mean you have to act a certain way in response to that thing. And there's freedom when you recognize that you're allowed to feel and experience things. And that can be separated, even if just by milliseconds of space, that can be separated from how you operate as a person and what you choose to do, right? Your choices and decisions and your actions, they don't have to be dictated by what you're feeling in any given moment. And there's so much freedom and power in that. I have a client who I really respect. I respect all of my clients, but I respect this client in particular because of how honest they are. And where I'm going with this is this person, through our working relationship, has caught and paused themselves in the middle of sentences and backtracked and said, "You know what? I'm sorry. I'm not being honest right now. Let me start over." And they'd be honest, and they'd say something different, and they'd tell the truth, even if it was hard or it was uncomfortable or it made them look maybe not great. Um, and one day I asked them, where did that begin? When did you start, pausing yourself and catching yourself? And they said, for most of my life, I've been a deceiver. I've played the game, I've played people, I've been deceptive, I've been dishonest. And I recognize that's part of my tendencies, right? I just naturally I do that. And I don't want to be that. And so I made a promise to myself when I catch myself, when I'm aware in the moment that I'm deceiving or I'm being dishonest, I made a promise to myself that I will stop, I will pause, and I'll choose honesty. And I admire the heck out of that. And not only the fact that they do that, but the fact that they're so open about it. And I think just to drive your point home, we all have those things, right? We all have those tendencies. We all have those parts of who we are that most likely will not change at this point in our lives. And being aware of them and accepting them and then choosing to take different action, I think that's as simple as you can put it, and it's powerful. So thank you.
And just to add on to that, going back to my back injury, I wouldn't have had any of these realizations or this wisdom if it wasn't for this crappy situation that had unwillingly come into my life. And something that I always say is that your greatest challenges will lead to your greatest gifts. I wouldn't be the person that I am today if it wasn't for all that pain and all that stress and suffering and all that doubt that I had went through. And I truly think that each of us needs to go through some type of just long-term sustained type of pain where you just like don't know when it's gonna end. Like that was the toughest thing for me. Like it's not like somebody was saying like, okay, like, 2 more days or like, 3 more months and then you'll be good. I got to a point in my life where I was like, I don't know what the end looks like here. I don't know if I'm going to get better. I don't know when I'm going to get better. So I was kind of just like living day by day to a certain extent. But in those moments, you gain so much wisdom. And I could probably say, I don't think I would be sitting here honestly today with you having this podcast or doing all the stuff that I do with my podcast or social media. None of that would be going on if I didn't go through everything with that back injury.
Same here. Yeah. The fact that I have the eye condition that I have and that I've struggled the way I've struggled is the only reason why I'm here talking about the things I talk about. And, I am so grateful for the struggle that I've been gifted, that I've been given. I didn't always see it that way, but I do now. And there's so much power in the unchosen suffering. And I think there's also similar power and strength and wisdom to be found in the chosen struggle and suffering. So, on that note, when you think of your life to this point, Tim, what's the hardest thing you've ever done on purpose? And why did you do that thing?
Probably going back to junior year of high school, the thing that I chose to do. So there was a winter hiking trip junior year of high school. And a big reason why I did it was you were able to skip exams for the semester. So I could have chosen to take exams, or I could have gone to the Adirondacks for a week and do this hiking and team building trip. So I was like, all right, I think that's part of the reason why I chose that. Anybody who knows me knows that I hate the winter. I hate the snow. I hate hiking. I hate being in the wilderness doing that type of stuff. I like doing it in the summer, but in the winter, I was like, God, no. And for the final 2 days, it was an overnight hiking trip in the Adirondacks, and I got severely dehydrated. We we had gone off our trail. It was supposed to be like a 6 mile hike. It ended up being like 12 or 13 miles. And I remember asking one of our guides who was a teacher at my school who came along. I said, "So when we finish the hike, how do we get back to our van?" And he was like, "Oh, well, the hike is just one big loop, so we'll end where we started." And I was so dehydrated, I couldn't even comprehend what he was saying, that we would just end where we finished, where we started. So that was definitely the toughest thing that I ever willingly put myself through, where I knew I was like, all right, yeah, this is gonna suck. Like, this is not gonna be fun, but I'm gonna go through with it. And then another funny part. So obviously when they tell you when you sleep in your tent, you shouldn't have any food around you for animals. You have to keep food about 50 feet away from where you're going to be sleeping. And I remember, and this is also middle of winter in the Adirondacks. So it's like when it gets dark, you go to bed. So we went to bed at like 5:30 because that's when the sun went down. And I remember finally got all comfortable and I just hear a rapper and it's a Cliff Bar in my pocket. And I'm like, I'm taking the chance. I'm not gonna get back up out of this tent and go put the food, 50 feet away from my tent. So I mean, that was a very interesting experience and probably the thing that was the toughest thing for me to do.
Mm. So, when you look back on that, if you could give your younger self in high school, a piece of advice before you embarked on that trip, what would you say so that you got the most out of that experience? Right? What would you tell yourself before you embarked on this uncomfortable, hard, inconvenient, unappealing thing so that you could get the most out of it?
Feel the pain. And that's something that I
Mm.
learned through all my back problems, not to keep harping on that, but allowing yourself to actually feel those emotions rather than trying to coax them. I think that was the biggest thing.
Are you familiar with the paradox principle of sacrifice. Have you ever heard of
I
that?
am not.
Cool. I love this. So you might have heard of this example, but the state of Colorado is one of the only places in the world where cows and buffalo live in close proximity. And so, because of the geography of Colorado, there are storms that form over the mountain ranges and then roll over the flat plains. And when the storms roll over the plains, the cows, they turn and run away from the storm. And because they're running away from the storm eventually catches up to them and they're in the storm for a longer period of time because they're moving in the same direction. The buffalo, for whatever reason, when they see the storm approaching, they turn toward the storm and they run directly into it. And because they're running into the storm, it actually passes much more quickly. And the paradox principle of sacrifice is the sooner you do that hard thing, the quicker you'll get to the other side. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of their lives running from the pain, from the discomfort, from the things they don't want to feel. And I think the truth in a lot of cases, and I can't say for certain, but I think for most people, the sooner you face that thing, you embrace the pain, you feel what you don't want to feel, you do what you don't want to do, the sooner you grow through it. And it's not easy, but I do think it's worth it to turn and face the storm more often than not.
You got to be a soldier with your emotions. I think that's a great
Mm,
analogy. If you're a soldier in war and you see your enemy, and let's say in this case, your enemy is your negative emotions. If you're that soldier in war, is it your job to run away, or do you see that soldier or you see that enemy and you're like, okay, I have to take that enemy on?
mm. I like that. So let's talk a bit about endurance. This is the Project Endure podcast. And so I ask every guest and I get different answers, which I love. When you hear the word endurance, what does that mean to you?
How long and how well are you able to just sit within an uncomfortable environment?
Mm,
And can you do it in a good fashion if you don't see a clock on the wall that's just ticking down when you know that that environment's going to end?
mm. I like the addition of the uncertainty, to that definition. I think that endurance is easier when you know it's going to end. Take a marathon, for example. You get to mile 20, 21, 22, your legs hurt, your lungs burn, you want to quit. You know you only have a couple more miles. And so it's a bit easier in that circumstance to just put one foot in front of the other and stick it out. But there are plenty of people who haven't chose their pain or they haven't chose their heart. It chose them and they don't know when or if it's going to end. And there are people who deal with things for a lifetime. And so maybe endurance isn't about getting to the end or getting to the other side, but maybe it's about learning how to endure and embrace the pain, embrace the hard things well, and grow through them, even if they never go away. Um, I love that. I really do. I'm trying to think, out of all the definitions I've ever gotten on this podcast, a lot of them are about moving, right? Moving forward, putting one foot in front of the other. You didn't say that. When you gave your definition, I almost imagined someone sitting in a storm. That's just what came to my mind. Why do you think you didn't have movement in your definition?
That's a great thing that you highlighted, and I'm glad that you're asking me because I think that's a big thing where sometimes whether it's losing or feeling defeat or feeling pain, you have to allow yourself just to be in that moment. You have to allow yourself being in that moment and just feeling that because once you start moving, you're focused on moving rather than focusing on just feeling that emotion and bring things back to my back again because there literally would be a lot of moments where I would just be sitting in pain, where I wasn't able to move well. So I would literally just have to be sitting in this pain with nothing else that I could do about it.
Yeah. And I would imagine there are people listening to this who are sitting in some sort of pain, whether that be proverbial or real. And I hope that the conversation to this point has been encouraging or insightful or both. The last question of the podcast that really drives all of this home, especially for the people listening who are going through a hard time or feeling the pain or avoiding the pain, is pretty simple. You know, if someone out there is in that spot and they just don't know where to go or what to do, or they're feeling discouraged, or they're feeling beaten up, knocked down, and you had a chance to speak to them for however long you want, you can say whatever you want. What would you say to them?
There's a reason.
Mm.
I'm a less is more guy. I think saying less is more impactful than going out on motivating spiels, but I think I would just say there's a reason.
I'll ask you one follow up. I respect the less is more, but I can't help but wonder because I don't know the answer for me. Do you think we need to find the reason? Do you think it's possible to trust that there's a reason without ever knowing what that reason is?
I think more times than not, actually, the reason finds us. I
Mm.
don't think we, yeah, I don't think we can always find a reason or pinpoint the exact time where you're like, okay, yep, that's exactly why I went through I did. But I think it's a gradual process that over time, those reasons find us.
That was beautiful. So, Tim, if someone listening to this is inspired by something you said, or they're curious about who you are, if they want to go back to the Jim Doyle days on your Instagram page and scroll back and see what that was about, where's the best place now for people to find you and connect with you?
Yeah, best place would be on Instagram at it's my name now, so at Tim.Doyle instead of an L in Doyle, it's a one. Also, I've got a podcast as well called The Outworker, so that'll be on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Joe is one of those fantastic episodes out of the 28 episodes I have right now, so that's probably a great place to start. And yeah, that's where people can find me.
I'll give you a compliment before we end this. And I've been doing a better job. I've been being more intentional with only giving compliments that I mean. And I know that sounds simple and almost like obvious, but I think a lot of times, and this is a tangent, but we give compliments like, oh, like that was good, or I like that thing you did, or what you're wearing, or whatever it is. I only am giving compliments that I mean deeply. And I told you this when we recorded. You reached out to me. It was a busy season of life. It was just hectic. And I said, hey, I'd love to be on the podcast, but can you reach back out in a couple of months or whenever I said, and you did, you followed up. It was simple. You were respectful. It was consistent. It was clear. And that's what it takes sometimes to stand out in this world, is to just do the basics and do them well and be a good person. And you did that. And then when I got on the podcast, it was one of my favorite conversations because you were so thoughtful and you asked such deep questions and we had such an awesome conversation. So if you're listening to this episode and you want more of this, go listen to my episode on Tim's podcast. And Tim, I really, really appreciate you and everything that you do. Also, just the person that you are. And I'm really looking forward to the day we get to meet in person and work out together. It'll be a good one.
That'll be an incredible day, Joe.
Cool. Well, thank you again, Tim. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.